Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of our Tech Talk series. Today's episode is the Spinnaker community and the 5 ways open source can benefit your business. My name's Bo Roberts. I run marketing for OpsMx, and I'm joined by today's speaker, Marky Jackson, who's our director of open source software. Welcome, Marky. Marky's director of open source software, a Jenkins plugin maintainer, Kubernetes release lead associate, Spinnaker contributor, chair for the upcoming Spinnaker contributor experience special interest group, continuous delivery foundation ambassador, and most recently co-leading the charge for the Spinnaker graduation process. So Marky's doing a lot of stuff. For those of you who may be new to OpsMx, just a little bit about us before we begin. We're a Silicon Valley-based startup headquartered in Sunnyvale, California. We help enterprise organizations modernize and transform their software delivery with Spinnaker. We provide an enterprise-ready distribution of Spinnaker called Open Enterprise Spinnaker, and we also offer managed Spinnaker as well as onboarding, training, and support services that help enterprises adopt and scale continuous delivery. Just a little housekeeping before we begin. If you have questions that you'd like us to answer during the Q&A, please type them into the question box in the Zoom control panel. You'll see a Q&A button down at the bottom of the window, and you can click on that to submit your question. And when we get to the Q&A, if you'd actually like to answer your question directly, you can hit the raise your hand button, and we'll unmute you and you can ask us a question. So anyway, we've got an interesting topic to discuss today. So Marky, I'm actually pretty new to open source, as you know from our conversation, so I'm really looking forward to this. It's always amazed me, just somebody who comes really from the other side of the industry, how open source communities really drive these projects and the volunteers behind them. I've always found it kind of amazing how people find the time in their busy lives to contribute to these projects and put out kind of amazing kinds of products. So anyway, I'm gonna turn it over to you and let's get started.
Well, first and foremost, Bo, thank you for having me. Thank you for everybody that's joined. I'm Marky. I totally agree with what you were talking about. When you think about large companies that are using open source, as an open source volunteer myself, and I use that term volunteer as opposed to a contributor, I'm super amazed by all of the time that people give for that and for the good of the project. And if you really think about it, it's kind of like a tribe or a family. And really it feels good to welcome people into that and make people feel rewarded and a part of something for giving their time and to watch them, grow. So it makes me, as a person, it makes me feel good to sort of give that back and watch the way that works and know that when open source will always be around, and to know that you contributed something to it, and then you can sort of, move on to something else like people often do, and know that you left in some way a legacy. That's just, to me, that's just so awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's funny, one of the ways I got introduced to open source, other than sort of, being exposed to it in the technology industry, is recently things like smart home platforms and things like that I use at home. And most of the drivers and extensions and all that for the smart home stuff is all done by volunteers, and it's a pretty thriving community. So not exactly enterprise, but definitely the same concept. So hey, let's kick things off. Wanted to ask you about the Continuous Delivery Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the Continuous Delivery Foundation is just a little over a year old. Really what that is it serves as sort of a vendor neutral home for many projects like Jenkins, Spinnaker, Tecton, Screwdriver. It also, it provides sort of that CI/CD space, and it's helping to define terminology that's like basically an open standard or abstraction. It also helps with interoperability of projects. And basically what they do in large part is they facilitate like software testing, progressive delivery, and supply chain management items.
Cool. I mean, you recently became a chairperson leading the effort for Spinnaker graduation process. What exactly is the graduation process? That's not something I'm familiar with in terms of the open source, but sounds pretty interesting.
I get asked this question quite often, and I usually start off with the example of Kubernetes and how wildly popular Kubernetes is. Everybody's using it, and you're seeing it, organizations adopt Kubernetes in their environments. And that largely is because of the maturity of the project. And in order for a project to gain maturity, it has to go through sort of a life cycle or stages. And that's kind of what the CDF also does. There is a certain set of standards that a project must meet before it can be considered mature or graduate. Like I'll give a couple examples, is you have to have a defined governing body that consists of members from at least 2 different companies. So you're trying to make it vendor neutral by not having sort of one body at the table, one company controlling it. You have to have a number of healthy committers from at least 2 different organizations. When you do the graduation process, and there's a lot more involved in that, it then has to be voted upon. Did you meet all of you being the project, did you meet all of the criteria? And it has to have 2/3 supermajority vote by the technical oversight committee within the CDF. So it really just means maturity. It means that businesses can use this project with ease and a comfort knowing it's met a certain set of standards.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I've known about open source, for a long time, but actually never heard of the graduation process. So that's kind of interesting. And it makes sense. It's like, I think, oftentimes, as you were saying, oftentimes these projects are initially led by kind of one company. And I think for enterprises to feel confident, sort of adopting some of these open source projects, they want to make sure that there's going to be, multiple companies participating, and it's not going to be, just driven by one company. So that's good. Anyway, why don't we kind of shift gears just slightly? Why don't we talk about open source in terms of how it benefits businesses? I mean, I've been in this industry long enough to, kind of remember when open source was really in its infancy, and the focus back then was all on, the cost factor, and that open source is free. But there's a lot of other benefits to it, and there's some, high profile examples, I think, of companies, Netflix being, maybe one just that comes to mind, of companies that really use open source, right now, sort of as like a recruiting, tool for engineers and things like that. So anyway, I'd just love to get your thoughts on, based on your experience, the benefits that companies see from adopting open source and participating in these, communities and projects.
A lot of times I've been in executive meetings for companies that are trying to adopt a given open source project. And we talk about the graduation process and what it means to be a mature open source project. And in these talks that I've had with various executives, I come back to the same 5 points on what a mature product is and why you being an executive would want to use open source in your company. And it's to that maturity. And it really starts on these 5 points with security. When you think about all of the work that goes into open source, just let's say from a code perspective, you have so much code going into something, and you have so many people reviewing that code, right? They're putting eyes on that code. And I remember sometime, and I don't remember who, but sometime a long time ago, someone said, given enough eyeballs, all bugs will show. And when you think about it, that's how open source is sort of doing. You have so many PRs that are getting put in and so many people reviewing it with a lot of various backgrounds that you're getting like the full like regression on. So people are really looking at what you're doing there. That leads into the second thing, which is flexibility. When you think about closed source software, you're locked into something. You're paying money for something that you may be paying for a while, and you may not be getting the full feature set that you want. And with open source, it's different. You take it, you use it, you can change it to meet your organizational needs because it's open source and it's a community, and you're able to ask questions and get sort of feedback from that community. So really, I mean, there's no need to throw money away when you can use open source. In one of the things I said in number two is number three is the community. This one's a big one for me because I've been doing open source for many, many years. And you have to remember, open source is built by a community of knowledgeable and passionate volunteers. And they care. And let me tell you from firsthand knowledge and my own experience, a community of an open source nature it's unmatched by passion and knowledge because you have so many different ideas coming in. And if you're going to use it, you know, it's great to have a community to turn to for support and ask questions. Quality is another thing. Open source is likely to give what the end user most wants, as opposed to closed source because it's already been decided. But with open source, you can most often build what you need, make it what you want, and give that back. So you get quality because you know what it is you want, and you're either going to build it or someone else is building it and they're sharing it. And, you know, when we talk about this talk that I've had with executives about using open source in their organization, we come back to cost. And the reality is that alone, for any C-level executive to make a decision on whether you should use open source or not, is the cost. I mean, that should help them right there. You know, and you get all of the benefits of open source at $0. So, you know, I don't think you need to explain much more than, you know, how much it costs for closed source products.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I come from the cybersecurity side of things, you know, in my career, and you know, it's funny. One of the things that I've noticed is that, you know, closed source vendors, security vendors, you know, will often, you know, kind of tell customers, oh, you got to be really wary of, you know, open source for security. What's your experience been there? You know, I see that as, you know, something that, you know, the community aspect could definitely, you know, be a big advantage to that in terms of, you know, surfacing vulnerabilities and bugs that lead to, you know, security vulnerabilities. But, you know, maybe in the early stages of a community, you know, that might be a little bit of a concern. So what's your experience been around that in terms of, you know, how you've seen that play out?
I can say that having worked on sort of security open source projects, such as Falco, that is falco.org, and how that project was so widely adopted by companies. You can see it by looking at sort of who the big companies that have are attributing to, you know, being used with Falco. There's other companies like Aquasec that are releasing, you know, open source tools that people are using, and they're finding a lot of value out of that. I find that security open source is a really awesome area because remember when I was saying you have all these eyeballs on the software, you also find vulnerabilities, not only in that open source project, but you may find it in something else. So now you have multiple people contributing CVEs that they're finding, and you see it's a very organic sort of process to let people know about these CVEs, and that's driven through security open source. So that's just, it's amazing to see that.
Great, yeah. Hey, I was thinking before we move on, why don't we throw up a couple poll questions? Everybody in the audience, we'd love to just ask a couple questions, see who's in the audience, and this kind of helps Marky maybe steer the discussion in certain area. So I'm going to just put up a couple poll questions, and if you can answer those, that'd be great. Completely optional, but so let's put up the first one. Wanted to know, are you currently using open source in your organization? I guess three answers: yes, no, or you're evaluating open source, right now. So anyway, if you could answer that, and
I always find this an interesting question because you see the difference of people that are maybe the individual contributors within an organization, and they see the value of open source, and they're always trying to sell it, to their management and the executive suite, to why it would benefit them. So I'm really curious to know how many people are actually using open source in their organization.
yeah, okay. Let's see, got a couple. Looks like a couple people still voting, but I'm going to shut this. I'm going to close this poll in a few seconds. So if you'd like to kind of answer the question, just do that now. And otherwise, we're going to end it now. Yeah, so at least in this audience, it looks like everybody's using open source, which is a good thing. Probably not representative of the overall market, but good to see that everyone here is using open source. And then let's also ask about people individually. So we're also wanted to see, are you currently an individual contributor to an open source project? And yeah, because there's two aspects, there's obviously two aspects to open source in terms of, the organization you work for, but then a lot of people contribute to projects outside of maybe their job and their duties at their employer. So, okay, we've got a couple more people are voting. If you'd like to answer the question, do that now. Otherwise, I'm gonna end it in a couple seconds. So I'm gonna end that right now. Let's see. So it looks like we've got it says 43% are contributing and 57% no. So that's pretty good. Yeah. Okay, let's ask one more question. For those who were contributing to an open source project, wanted to know, are you guys contributing to more than one open source project or just one? What do you find, Marky? Do you find that once people get into the whole open source thing that they often are contributing to more than one, or?
Usually what I've seen sort of as an average is people will join one project, they get familiar with it, becoming a member of that organization, and then they'll move to a different project, but still maintain that membership in that original project. And I think that I find that people become more well-rounded by going to more than one project because they understand the differences. A great example is like the Kubernetes community is they're so like everything is dialed in. Everybody knows what they're doing, and you find that it's a very welcoming sort of community. But you may go to another community that's just getting started and processes really aren't in place, and having that experience from a well-rounded community to a community that's still maybe in its infancy, you're able to translate some of what you learned and maybe become a leader a little bit faster.
Great. Okay, I'm going to end this poll question and we'll see what we got here. So anyway, it looks like half of those people are doing more than one, so that's interesting.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on here. So let's talk a little bit about how people can become involved in either the Spinnaker community or open source communities in general. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so everybody first has to have a passion, right? You want to do something because you're giving your free time to do it. So just the desire to do it is your passion. How do you get involved is you know, find the community that you really think you want to know something more about. Spinnaker, you know, you may want to deal with CD, and Spinnaker is a great community to get involved in. Start attending like a general meeting. Find, you know, usually every open source project will have a calendar that shows what their special interest groups, or SIGs for short, meetings are. Like, choose a meeting and just go to one. I have often found that you will have people that know how to write code, and then there are people that are just learning how to write code, and then there's people that don't know how to write code. And none of that actually matters for an open source project, because most, at least all that I have been involved in, have a varying degree of help that they need. For example, you may help with documentation. There may be documentation that's already out there that has, you know, misspellings. That's a great way to start contributing to open source. One of the terms that I use often, and it's used in other communities, is the chop wood, carry water aspect. And the chop wood, carry water aspect basically means that you will do anything, right? It doesn't, you know, I may be a trained software developer, but that doesn't mean I can't work on documentation. That doesn't mean I can't work on moderating Slack. And there's all these different things that are available to people. You don't have to know just how to code to join an open source project. Another thing that I think is really critical is you may want to know how to write code. You may want to learn about how to do this. And it's okay to ask for help. Most projects will have some form of mentorship available, but you just have to ask. So you may say, I know how to write Java, but I'd love to learn how to write Go. Would anybody be willing to mentor me? And in all of the communities I've been involved in, somebody will step up and say, I would be glad to help you. And if you ever go into a community where someone doesn't want to help you, let me know, because I will do everything in my power to try to help. So to really answer that question, Bo, is you have to have a desire to want to do something, and it could be just 1 hour a week. It could be 5 hours a week. If you don't know how to write code, that's totally okay. Documentation, helping host a meeting. There's so many different things. And finally, if you want to learn something, you have to make sure to ask. Don't be afraid to ask. And if anybody's rude to you, or you feel that you're being treated wrong, most communities have a code of conduct. It's always good to read what that code of conduct is, because every open source community should be inviting, welcoming, and nurturing to you, because you, the new contributor, are what drives that community. Businesses help, don't get me wrong, but it's the individual contributor I most care about.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, the whole code of conduct thing. You know, it's probably gotten a lot more sort of relevant or a lot more important over the last 5 to 10 years. Is like social media has, you know, we've you know, experienced this increase in like sort of online trolling and stuff like that. I never really thought about the whole code of conduct thing, but you know, thinking about it now, I think that's probably a pretty important aspect to it.
Yeah, it's really, the code of conduct is really what helps protect people, especially underrepresented, minorities, women. All of those things should all be welcomed, and they should not have to fear that they're going to have to deal with some toxic behavior. That's just not what community should be.
Definitely, yeah. So yeah, let's, you know, the next thing I wanted to talk about was, you know, I always love to hear people's stories, you know, and I thought it'd be really interesting if we just, you know, had you talk about your story about how you got into open source, like what, you know, and, you know, how once you got into it, you know, sort of how you've gotten to this level of participation and leadership that you've, you know, are at now. I think it's probably a pretty interesting story. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. A lot of times people think that you're some awesome developer and you just went and did something and you're in the leadership role. And maybe that does work for other people. My story is a little bit different, and I'm proud of my story. I grew up in a boys' home, so I didn't grow up with family or anything like that. I found pretty early on, I'd say around 8 or 9 years old, that I had this fondness for computers. And if anybody's ever read some of the interviews that I've done, it actually, my fondness started with meeting one of my friend's dads who was a software engineer for NASA. And he built the propulsion system that kept the space shuttle in orbit, and it would like fire off a little rocket. But as a kid, I didn't know that. I just saw him writing a program one day. I was super amazed by what he was doing, and he mentored me.
Wow.
And through my life, I've had like these sort of mentorships that have sort of shaped who I am today. I interned at a company called Jasmine Multimedia that was run by a gentleman named Jay Samit. And Jay Samit is, he's had a book out called Disrupt This, and it's a bestseller. And this guy really showed me how to love what you do. I then, I did the 9-to-5 sort of software job for a long time. And then I went to work at Yahoo. And that just kind of opened my mind to like amazing things that you do in software and open source. One of the early projects that I worked on was Kubernetes, and this was pre 1.0 Kubernetes. I think the version that's going to be coming out soon is 1.19. So I've been doing Kubernetes for a very long time. And then I got involved in the Jenkins community and sort of moved my way from a plugin maintainer into sort of like a core maintainer and various other roles. And I found that one of the most awesome things about this was not all of the things that I was learning and the people that were really mentoring me and helping me was one of the things I found was that when people see you in a leadership role, they'll gravitate towards you. And when they gravitate towards you, you have two ways you can handle it. You can be pompous or you can be humble and help people. When you do the humble and help people, one of the rewards that I have found was watching people light up when they learn something, or when they have a question and someone actually takes the time to help them. To watch them light up, to me, that shows like, this is what it's about. It's not about all the code you write. It's not about I lead this, or I'm a chair of this, or I work for this company and I have this title. It's about watching an individual light up, because you know that you set the pace for them individually. And the hope is that they'll pay that forward and do the same thing. So that's kind of like my story. And then I went to UCLA, and then I also went to and graduated from MIT. And a lot of people are sort of surprised by that because if you think about my upbringing, I didn't have this sort of like, great upbringing, but I've done these great, what I think are really great things with what I had. And that really goes to show that I don't care, me personally, I don't care where you come from. I don't care what you as an individual think is a hindering. If you want to turn something and do something, you got all the power to do it, and you can do it. And if you don't think you can, talk to me and I will help you do it.
Yeah. That's great. That's great, Marky. That's a really inspirational story, I think, in a lot of ways. Yeah, and I think, I think open source communities, based on what I've seen so far, I mean, I think they really are empowering for a lot of people. They provide opportunities for people that they might not normally have in terms of learning and contributing and, getting some leadership experience and things like that. So that's great. All right. I think we're towards the end, and we have some questions from the audience, and so we should probably move on to the Q&A. So everybody in the audience, we're going to start the Q&A in just a minute or two. If you have a question for Marky, you can submit a question using the Q&A button, and I believe I can unmute people. So if we have anybody who's not shy and who'd like to just ask your question over the audio, I can unmute you, and we can do it that way. So yeah, if you could submit your questions now, we'll start in about a minute. One thing I'm going to do right now, though, is I'm going to put up a poll. Let me see here. Often in our webinars, we do this. in our webinars, people often ask us for the presentation slides after, in this, we don't have any presentation slides, but we're happy to send you a link to the recording of this if you'd like to pass that along to somebody else in your organization or other colleagues, anybody who might be interested, or if you had to go off and take care of something and missed part of the session and you'd like to view it again. The other thing that you can, so I'm putting up a poll question here, and you can select to have us send you that link. And just wanted to point out a couple of other things. As I mentioned, OpsMx provides a enterprise-ready version of Spinnaker called Open Enterprise Spinnaker. We'd be happy to give you a demo of that, and you can select there if you'd like that. We also offer Spinnaker training, onboarding, and support. If you'd like us to follow up with you about that, click there. Another thing that we offer is we do these complimentary continuous delivery strategy workshops. It's like a 2-hour Zoom session where we get on with you and your team and just work through your strategy and aspects of execution to help you get going in the right direction there. So if you'd like one of those, you can select that. So I'm going to leave that up for another minute or so. If you'd like us to follow up with you, just click there. Otherwise, let's start the Q&A. Marky, the first question is, I don't write code, but can I still contribute to an open source project if I don't write code? So
you totally can. Docs is always the easiest one. Most open source communities have membership, right? So if you look at GitHub and you'll see people have these little organizational tags, that means they've been invited to join an organization. Kubernetes is one, Spinnaker is one. Most of these organizations have what they call a contributor ladder. And that ladder means in order to become part of that organization, you have to have so many commits, so many PRs. And most open source projects that I know of, all of their docs are, Hugo or some of the other frameworks. So you could easily do a PR for words that are wrong. I have found that some days, and this is kind of what I do, and if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see that I've tweeted out good first issues multiple times. I'll go through docs and I'll find, somebody spelled a word wrong, and I will tweet out, hey, good first issue. Somebody can work on that issue to get PRs under their belt to work up that contributor ladder. So do you need to know how to write code? No.
Great. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the primary questions people probably have, because not everyone writes code, but yeah, what I've seen is, especially in the Spinnaker community, there's just a lot of things that need to get done. So definitely a lot of places where people can add value. Another question somebody had is, I don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to contribute. How can I help a project in a small way with a small amount of time?
1 hour. If you got 1 hour a week, if you got, more than that, great. But it doesn't have to be a heavy contribution. It just shows that you care about a project and you want to help it in any way that you can. I've seen people that give 1 hour a month, but they still stay active in the project. So you totally don't have to give, it doesn't have to be a full-time job.
Okay. Somebody asked, is there a code of conduct? I think we talked about that earlier, but if there's anything else you want to kind of mention about codes of conduct?
Yeah, it's always good to, every project, most projects have some form of governance. And if you go to their GitHub repo and you just look up governance there, you'll see where the code of conduct is. I often refer to a code of conduct to see what a community will allow and what they won't allow. For example, saying certain words. You want to feel good in what you're doing and what you're participating in. And if people are talking negative and it's toxic, I want to know that the code of conduct is going to protect me of that. Most open source projects have a code of conduct. It's usually based off of what they call the code of conduct covenants, and I believe the most recent version of that is 2.0. Most projects are using the 1.4 version, but I know, for example, Spinnaker, Jenkins, and the CDF, by and large, is moving to the 2.0. Most of those are currently on the 1.4 version.
Great. Another person asked, can I find a mentor, or can somebody mentor me in terms of joining open source community, an open source community for the first time? How does that work?
So I'm going to talk about two separate communities, and then I'll give a third option. In the Spinnaker community, there is a new special interest group being formed, and that is called the Contributor Experience. Myself and a awesome person named Rosalind will be chairing that special interest group. And that is one of the sub projects of that will be mentoring. So you want to join the Spinnaker community, you would join this Contributor Experience SIG, and then you would say, I am new, I'd like to find out about this, and they will pair you with a mentor. Another community that does this is the Kubernetes community. They have a SIG called Contributor Experience, and one of the sub projects of Contributor Experience is the mentoring work group, mentoring work group, which I am a part of that. And what we will do, there's multiple different things that we do. One of the things we do is something called a new contributor workshop, where we'll do walking through the code base. We'll show you how to open your first PR, how to write a good first PR, one of the things that I often find, and I just having a conversation with somebody about this last night, a lot of people don't understand how to use Git. And they'll get caught up in something. We'll do workshops on showing you how to use Git, from the command line. Another thing that a lot of SIGs will do is they will pair you based off your interest with another SIG. So let's say, for example, you like working on, custom resource definitions, and you want to learn Go. They'll say, okay, this particular SIG has this person available. Here's their time slots available to be mentored. Pair it up and then see, how that goes. And Contributor Experience will also they'll check in on see how that mentoring is going. The third way that I always put out to everybody is sometimes everybody's busy, and communities are sometimes you don't hear something back. And if you ever are looking to be mentored and you are not finding anything, you can find me in probably, Kubernetes, Spinnaker, but also on Twitter. Direct message me and I'll help. I'll help any way I can, because I believe in making people see that spark and feeling good about what they're doing. So if all else fails, definitely drop me a line. My Twitter is Marky Jackson 5, all one word, and it's the number 5, and that's because my last name is Jackson, and there's 5 of us in our family. So the Jackson 5. Why change that?
That's great. I'm actually going to put that into the chat. I'm going to put Marky's Twitter handle in the chat. So if any of you guys want to follow up with him, feel free, and you can find it right there in the chat. Okay. Great. Okay. Let's see. I think we're kind of, unless somebody submits a question, now I think we're sort of at the end of the questions. So let me make a couple announcements, and then if we have any other questions, we'll take them. If we don't, then we'll kind of wrap things up. I just wanted to make you guys available, aware of an upcoming webinar that Marky is giving. Marky's going to be giving a webinar on Spinnaker with Jenkins. It's called The Butler Set Sail on the Open Seas. That's a nice title, Marky. I like that one. It's going to be on the 28th of July next week, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And I put a link to that webinar in the chat as well. So you guys, if you'd like to attend that, you can find the link for that. Another thing I wanted to point out is that there's a pretty healthy Spinnaker community Slack channel. It's actually a Slack workspace with lots and lots of different channels. OpsMx actually maintains a channel in there as well, and we provide, kind of community support through our Slack channel there. I've actually put the link to the Slack channel in the chat as well. So if any of you guys are interested in joining that or checking that out, you can do that with that link. Let's see. Don't see any other questions. So I think I don't know, Marky, any last thoughts you want to share on either Spinnaker or just open source communities in general before we wrap things up?
Well, I'd like to say that first and foremost, thank everybody for coming, and I really do appreciate it. Spinnaker is an awesome project. I foresee that 2021 for Spinnaker is going to be super huge. There's a lot of work going in to the project currently. We also have Spinnaker Summit coming up in, I believe, the end of this year, and doing a lot of work on that as well. If you have any questions and you don't feel like asking it publicly, you need any help with anything, I am a very approachable person. I'm a super collaborative person. I believe in helping everybody because that's just in my DNA. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you feel the need to. And thank you for your time, Bo.
Yeah, no problem. It's been my pleasure. Okay. Yeah, I don't think we have any other questions. So everybody, I just want to thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed this session. I want to thank Marky. Thank you, Marky, for a great talk. Learned a lot. And I'd encourage everyone to go to OpsMx.com and check out our webinar calendar. I mentioned the one webinar coming up that Marky's doing on Jenkins. We've got other ones coming up on things like OpenShift, Kubernetes, lots of topics like that. So definitely go to OpsMx.com, check it out, and we hope to see you on another webinar or tech talk soon. So thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a great day.
Cheers, everybody.